So if you're like me, one of the things that you have done over the past 6 months or so is really worry about your Varroa numbers. It's become a huge issue with beekeeping. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I imagine, given the great extension presence that you guys have in the state of Michigan, that you have heard this over and over. But what I want to do tonight is kind of give you a refresher on some of the other pests and diseases in the colony. One of the big issues that we have now is our bees are faced with a very much of a multifactorial issues which cause colony health decline. And so if we can keep bees healthy, we can keep very happy bees. And so that is ultimately my goal as an extension presence in the state of Maryland and also across the nation. It's something that I really feel passionate about. I think we can do. But we have a very long road ahead of us. And so I'm hopefully tonight will give you a couple tools to put in your toolbox to help you further along that path. So as she said, I'm with the University of Maryland Bee Lab. I started with Dr. vanEngelsdorp, Dennis vanEngelsdorp, about 2.5 years ago. I moved here from Texas with my wife. She's from Maryland, and we decided to settle here. It's absolutely beautiful. We also don't have Africanized bees, which is a very big plus for beekeeping in this area. But this is our lab. We actually have quite a few of the people here. You may have read articles in ABJ. I know Dennis and Karen both write, and Natalie Steinhauer is the one that you get a lot of the great information about the national survey that you guys hopefully all took this year. If not, make sure to take it next year for 2021. Lots of good information comes from that. But I have this absolutely fantastic group of scientists and beekeepers that I work with here, and we are working towards finding as many answers as we can for honeybee health issues. So I'm going to dive right in. My style of presentation is kind of what I call the fire hose. I'm going to give you a bunch of information. What I want to do with this is spark interest. I want you to think about it. I don't expect you to be able to regurgitate every fact that I throw out there. But if you have questions, save them to the end. And you can always reach me at the bsquad@umd.edu, which you see on the bottom of your screen there. And our website is umdbsquad.com. And so those are two ways of reaching me. In addition, you can submit questions here at the end and we can answer them during the Q&A. So I'm going to dive in. These are not in a particular order, but I did kind of want to do them in kind of worst to sometimes you see them in the colonies. And so I don't want you to think that any of one of these you're going to see more of than others. Hopefully you'll never see any of them, although that's very doubtful. But I don't want you to read too much into the order of this, but just understand that these are maladies that you may find in your colony. So first and foremost, and this is one that I'm very familiar with, having come from the inspection world, is American FoulBrood. It is probably the best I can think about from all the other states, the only regulatory disease that we currently have in the United States with honeybees. It is a spore-forming bacteria, and that's what makes it particularly virulent. Those spores can last for a very long time, which we'll talk about here in a minute. They spread very quickly. Before the advent of antibiotics, they were undoubtedly the worst thing that could happen in your beekeeping operation. And it still can be pretty bad if you get a case of this. And so not something I want to necessarily say that isn't found anymore, because we still definitely do find it. But hopefully you won't find it quite as much. And if you do, hopefully you will be able to find answers for it very quickly. It does infect up to 72-hour-old larva. After that, the larva's immune system is strong enough that it can fight off the infection. But these spores are fed by the nurse bees to the larva. And so it's something that the transmission happens, and there's not much that the beekeeper can do about that direct transmission other than making sure that the disease is not present in the colonies. It is pretty obvious if you have this. The identification, there's several key characteristics. First off being that it is only found in capped larvae. You're not going to find this in uncapped larvae. The brood generally has kind of a waxy, sickly looking appearance to it. Many times it has small perforations in the cappings. That's a dead giveaway that you might have American FoulBrood. Another thing is a distinctive smell. If I had to describe it, I would describe it as dirty gem socks and sulfur. So as you can tell, that's a pretty distinctive smell, or you can imagine. I mean, I've actually had this in an apiary one time when I was going to inspect. I got out of the truck, the wind was blowing, I guess, just in the right way, and I was able to smell it outside of a colony. And so that's pretty bad infection that this particular colony had. But the fact that I could just smell it outside tells me that, you know, this is something not to mess with. And so we were able to find it in one of the colonies and isolate it and eventually destroy the colony to remove that infection. So we do take it very seriously, or when I was inspector, we did take it very seriously. The pupil often die inside of the cells. When that happens, they can form what's called a pupil tongue, which if you look on the bottom of the screen there, it's a great shot of that. When the pupa die and desiccate and eventually go into the spore form, they form these scales, which are a major source of the infection. You can see on the bottom right-hand picture there, this is actually looking from the top of the frame down. You'll see those little, they look like little pieces of beef jerky in there. That is the spores, and they're very hard to dislodge from the wax. You usually end up breaking the wax. We do know that these spores can be viable for up to 70 years. Chances are probably longer. They just found, there's a research paper a number of years ago where they actually found an old sample and the spores were still viable. And so this can be an issue, especially if you are buying equipment from people that have gone out of business, people that you don't know, which is why I always like to know the beekeepers that I get stuff from. It can be an issue. It is only generally found in the comb, although it can, spores can infect woodware. So scorching it is always a good idea. It's always good hygienics, especially when you're getting newer equipment into your apiary. Like I said before, these spores are fed to the larva, and so that creates kind of a big problem because it's not something that you as a beekeeper can prevent other than removing the infection altogether from your apiary. I do recommend, if you suspect or you see what you think is American FoulBrood in your colonies, that you contact your local or your state inspection service. I understand in Michigan it's a little different. They mostly do out-of-state permits, but let them know so that they can help you get through the infection. You can treat American FoulBrood, although when you treat it, you're really just suppressing the symptoms. But these days you actually have to go and get a veterinary prescription for the antibiotics to do that. Realistically, by the time you do all that, I don't recommend that. I honestly just recommend destroying the hive and the woodware. You can transfer the bees to a clean frames and clean woodware if you want. Traditionally though, we've just destroyed the entire colony altogether just to stem that issue. And so that is my recommendation for American FoulBrood. Definitely do not move any hives in or out of the apiary. That can be a huge risk and risk of spreading it. Also notify your neighbors. I know it's one of those pride points where we think, oh, well, I don't want to let my neighbors know I got bad things going on in my apiary, but it's really can head off big spreader events of this. I think with COVID and spreading of viruses and diseases, we've got a lot more aware of that type of thing. And so we don't want to see that happen with American FoulBrood. And finally, this is just kind of a fact I put in there. A lot of times you'll hear people say, don't feed bees honey, especially if you don't know where it came from. And one of the reasons for that is American FoulBrood spores have been shown to reside in honey over long periods of time. And so it's just one of those things you want to make sure that you're not feeding your colonies contaminated honey. So chances of it are very, very slim, but better safe than sorry in that case. And so that's American FoulBrood. And next we're going to go into European FoulBrood, which I chatted with Anna a little bit before this, and she mentioned that this is an issue that you guys have quite a bit up there. We do have it in the mid-Atlantic and in the southern states when I worked in Florida and Texas. Although for us, thankfully, it generally will clear up after the spring flow gets going. Generally, the weaker hives that have this, once they get that good flow of nectar coming in and the good flow of pollen, this will dry up and clean itself out. If it doesn't, a lot of times we recommend requeening the colonies. One of the reasons this can be an issue is it will delay the development of the worker force in the colony. It won't necessarily outright kill the colony, except for in extreme situations, but it will weaken the colony to the point that they're not producing enough workers to do all the tasks and then go out and forage. So that's where this really comes in and can be a big issue for the bees. It is non-spore forming, so it's not nearly as virulent as American FoulBrood, but it can be an issue, especially in the spring when your colonies are building up. It's pretty recognizable. It is before the brood is capped is when the disease really takes hold. The larvae look kind of twisted. They go from brown to a kind of a yellow, or sorry, yellow to kind of a brown. There are no secondary characteristics. When I say no ropiness, there is a test that you can do for American FoulBrood where you actually put a toothpick in a cell and stir it around and pull out. And if the mass that's in there ropes out, in other words, it looks like kind of snot hanging from the end of the toothpick, it's a characteristic of American FoulBrood. You won't find that with European FoulBrood. Dried larvae are easy to remove from it, and it doesn't really emit the same odor. It just smells more like decay. So if you ever had a frame that's been sitting out for a while that had brood on it and it's kind of rotting, it's more of that type of smell. This is a great picture. Rob Snyder took it from Beekeeping Partnership that really shows the juxtaposition of the contaminated larva versus the non-contaminated larva. So if you look in the middle, that's a healthy larva. I'm sure at some point it probably will not be healthy, but the larvae on each side of it are contaminated with European FoulBrood. And so you can see those lines through the larva. Those are actually the spiracles you're seeing, but that's a very good picture of what that European FoulBrood contamination looks like. And so these are the two FoulBroods. Like I said, American FoulBrood, you don't see a whole lot of anymore. European FoulBrood, I definitely will see it in early spring, sometimes late in the fall. If you're having a persistent issue with it, there are treatments out there that are available, but they are by prescription only now. So you'll need to contact a veterinarian for that to get the veterinary feed directive to get those antibiotics to feed your hives. But realistically, to me, it's easier just to requeen and feed and see if it clears up that way than it is to treat. So it's completely up to you as an operator what you do on that one. And if you only have a couple hives, probably better just to requeen on that. So the next thing I'm going to move into are viruses. Viruses have really become the hot ticket, I guess you could say, although not very nicely, in the bee world right now. We are experiencing quite a number of them. I've listed 10 here. There are most certainly more out there, and we're discovering more and more each day. One of the ones I'll point out is deformed wing virus. We used to think it was one virus. Now we know it's at least two different subviruses in that complex. And so one seems to be taking over from the other. We've seen the same thing in nosema, which we'll talk about later. But we're constantly finding more and more of this out. One really cool thing with this, if you're kind of a science nerd, is that the Beekeeping Partnership has a great database set up of all of the USDA national survey results throughout the last, I think, almost 10 years now on the Beekeeping Partnership's website under data. You can look and see for your state which one of these viruses are the most prevalent. And so some of these you may not notice in your colony. They could be functioning pretty fine, although usually there's some tattletale signs. But ones like the deformed wing virus, Israeli acute paralysis virus, sac brood virus, those can actually show pretty readily up in your colony. So they'll have very tattletale signs, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But I just wanted to direct you to that because it's a great resource. Like I said, if you're kind of a data nerd and you want to look at what your state has historically had issues with, that might be a good place to start. So the first one, and this is one that I see fairly frequently, is deformed wing virus. Now, we used to just call it, like I said, deformed wing virus. Now we have deformed wing virus A and B. Does that really mean much to the average beekeeper? No, not really. But it is a virus that is pretty bad for the bees. We know the bees can be asymptomatic with this. In other words, you won't see the characteristics of it, but it will weaken the hive just like us. When we have a virus, we're not at full capacity, especially if we're not getting good nutrition. It can cause a lot of stress on the bees, and you throw a lot of the other factors that they have on going for them right now, and it can really, really suppress the hive. And so something just to look out for. It is correlated with high Varroa mite counts. And so the obvious thing here is if you can keep your Varroa mite counts low, it's very good for reducing the transmission of this disease. A lot of people think when they see this, oh, I got to treat for Varroa mites. Honestly, that's good, but it's probably a little bit on the late side by that point. And so this is where that good Varroa management comes in handy, where you hopefully won't see these flare-ups of this virus. You'll see in the upper right corner, that one black bee right there with the deformed wings, they're kind of shriveled up. She has very much a very bad case of the deformed wing virus. She obviously won't recover from that. Eventually, you'll find her wandering on the ground in front of the colony. They do serve a function in the colony over time as a nurse bee, but once they get into that the foraging phase of their life, they will try to go out of the hive, and it just doesn't work. And so you'll find them crawling in front of the colony from time to time. And so that's something to look out for when you go to work your bees. Now, another virus, and this is one I see fairly often, is the chronic bee paralysis virus. We had a beekeeper recently that thought they had this in their colony. They had a couple of these, what I call ball bees or shiny bees. We tested it, and actually, just by seeing a couple of these bees present, we found in the sample that we took from the colony that they had an extremely high infestation of the chronic bee paralysis virus. And so, again, with this, you'll see some bees crawling on the ground. That greasy, hairless bee look is a dead giveaway. That is not to be confused with kind of older bees when they start to lose a lot of their hair. These are truly ball bees. They're just not any hair on them anywhere. And so it's a pretty dead giveaway that you have these viruses. Again, we don't have antivirals for bees, so there's not really any treatments other than good nutrition. And if it persists, changing the queens. This beekeeper that we had this happen, she requeened her colony, and the colony actually produced some of the biggest honey crop that she had this year. So happy endings on that one, which was really awesome. And finally, the last one I'm going to talk about as far as viruses go, and this is one of those viruses that you actually will see, sac-brood virus. It's a very descriptive virus, like a deformed wing virus. Characteristics are the larva actually form these almost look like gelatinous sacs. So they look like a larva, a little discolored. You can actually remove it from the cell, and it's obvious that the larva is dead. This is something that you'll see similar to European FoulBrood. I generally see this in the spring and the fall when the hives are nutritionally stressed. And so this is something, if it doesn't go away with feeding, if it doesn't go away as the nectar flow comes on, you might want to consider requeening, and a lot of times that can help with this. I did have the question come in a little while ago, how long do these viruses stay present in the colonies? Do they stay present in the woodware? Do they stay present in the frames? I actually had to looked up an article, and Dr. Milbrath was the author of it, which was awesome. And in that article, she explained that we don't really know. And so this can be a big thing, especially if you're transferring frames or brood or equipment from site to site or from beekeeper to beekeeper. You always want to make sure that you're getting clean equipment. And so that's something to really look out for. It may seem like a really good deal on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, that somebody that their bees all died and they want to get out of beekeeping has some equipment for sale, but there may be a reason why they're getting out of beekeeping, because they didn't keep very healthy bees. So I always put that caution out there that you want to watch out with what you purchase and from whom you purchase it, because we don't want you getting nasty virus-ridden equipment. Now, this next one isn't really a virus, but I always like to put it in here because I see this quite a bit. And I have a lot of beekeepers will misdiagnose European FoulBrood or other diseases for what we call parasitic mite syndrome. This is generally found in colonies that have extremely high mite loads. A lot of times it can be confused with brood cannibalization, which is different. But what it'll look like is that the larvae are not tended well, that the larvae start to rot in the cells. In other words, they've died in there for whatever reason. The nurse bees are not cleaning them out. And so you'll see this. A lot of times, at least where I'm down in the mid-Atlantic, it'll present in late fall. And so this is generally when the mite populations are the highest. And so if you have a colony that either had a mite explosion go on or that has persistently high mite loads, it's not uncommon to see this type of thing in there. There are other diseases. European FoulBrood, we think once all of the bacteria die off, can create this thing we call snotty brood. To my knowledge, it hasn't been completely defined. This can be confused with paralytic mite syndrome sometimes, but generally anytime you're seeing brood not look very healthy, it's either a nutrition issue or it's a Varroa issue. And so I just wanted to put that out there because these are some of the things that you might run across. Again, Varroa mites link in very heavily to a lot of the stuff we do, but it's just the name of the game these days. So let's switch gears here from the things we can't really see, like viruses and stuff, to more of the what I'll call megafauna of the bee world here. Small hive beetles, you probably are not as infested as the southern states are, but I know they're up in that area. I know they're all the way up to Canada at this point. For you guys, it's probably more of a honey house issue than actual hive issue, but small hive beetles can be an issue no matter what because they destroy comb. In the South, people tend to think, oh, small hive beetles actually will kill bees. They don't. They're a good cleanup crew and they're a very explosive breeder. So those two things together can be very detrimental to a bee colony. I personally really admire them. I think they're like little tanks. They're like the little sharks of the bee world because they have some amazing adaptations to stay in the colonies. You'll see their little feet there. They have those little prong toes on them that allows them to hold on very, very tightly to bottom bores to pretty much any substrate so that they can't be removed. You'll see this beetle here on the right-hand side. That's what a behavior we call turtling. They actually look like a turtle where they draw all their appendages in. They're still able to hold down onto whatever substrate they're on, and it's very hard for bees to dislodge them. Also, they have this other really neat trick that the bees tend just to ignore them. We don't know why. There's thought that it may be a pheromone mimicking, or they put off some kind of smell that the bees just, they don't really register, so they just leave them alone. But small hive beetles can be an issue, especially in summer, especially with colonies that are weaker. Also, like I said, in honey houses, if you pull your supers off on a Monday and expect to extract them on a Sunday, I can tell you right now, you're going to have small hive beetle larvae in them by that time. And so this can be a big issue with storage of equipment, especially supers that have had pupa in them, that have any type of pollen or bee bread in them. Small hive beetles, it's like a buffet for them. And so that becomes a real big issue. They are originally from sub-Saharan Africa. They were first positively identified in '98. Chances are they've been here before that. They just weren't identified correctly. Their life cycle is pretty basic. They use the hive as their restaurant, so they get all the food and nutrition they need from it. They will lay their eggs in there. Generally, bees will find those eggs and remove them, or the beetles won't bother laying them if the colony's strong. The minute that colony goes weak or goes queenless or has some type of catastrophic event, those beetles say, hey, the buffet's open. And so they'll actually go lay an immense amount of eggs each day. Those larvae will hatch in just a few days. After about a week or so, the larvae enter what's called the wandering phase, where they actually will drop out of the hive into the soil below. They'll pupate in the soil. Once they come up, the cycle starts over. They can overwinter in a colony. They will stay in the cluster. If for some reason you ever have a colony that dies out over winter, you can look through that cluster, and a lot of times if you have small hive beetles in your area, you will find them in the cluster. So especially in the southern states, they can be very, very bad. Up north, they may not be quite as bad, but it's definitely something to look out for. These are the eggs, a couple millimeters in length. The larvae, pretty unique looking. They have those little spikes down the sides, and when they move very much like a worm instead of like a caterpillar. So that's the difference between them and wax moths, and we'll talk about wax moth here in just a second. They do regurgitate a type of, I can't even think of it right now. What they do is when they tunnel through the honey and bee bread, they will create this kind of gooey mess, and that comb is pretty much useless at that point. The bees won't use it again. Over time, that will actually start to leak. I've had hives before that the slime is just leaking out the front cover or the front landing board, and so that becomes a huge issue with it. It can cause the honey to ferment. It creates a big nasty mess of the colony. Generally, you just have to throw the frames away, and there's not much you can do with it. And I'm sorry, the thing I was looking for before is yeast. There's a yeast that is associated with the digestive system, which helps promote that fermentation. So something to look out for. Really great for chickens. If you got chickens, you know, make lemonade out of lemons. You can feed them to your chickens, and they will love you till the day they die. There are some treatments for it, but honestly, the best defense is a strong colony, and a colony that is only given as much room as it can defend. And so if you have honey supers on there, you've had a split or a swarm, and the hives were, you know, rebuilding, it's probably a good idea to remove those over time. I really prefer the passive traps, like the oil traps. Swiffer sheets we're finding work extremely well. And if you have to go into active control of them, there are beneficial nematodes out there, as well as chemical treatments, both a ground drench, which is a permethrin, which is a non-targeted pesticide. So I don't recommend that unless it's an extremely high infestation and you know you've had a lot of larvae escape from the colony. And then your kind of nuclear option is mite check, which is Coumaphos, which is labeled to be used for small hive beetle control. Although other than in extreme situations, I would kind of advise against that. We've found to be a pretty nasty chemical in the colony, and it does stick around for a while. So there are other ways of treating other than the chemical method for that. So I would highly recommend that. The next thing you'll find from time to time are wax moths. Believe it or not, there's two different ones. There's the greater wax moth and the lesser wax moth. Very bland, nondescript. Can really ruin your day if you let them. The two varieties are generally found together. They are found just about anywhere bees are found. We do have lesser wax moths here in the mid-Atlantic region. I imagine you guys probably don't have them that much up north, other than with the bees are transported from Florida or somewhere like that. Greater wax moths are significantly larger, so they're more noticeable. It's something to look out for. The greater wax moth does have a pretty high fecundancy rate as far as egg laying goes, can lay up to about 600 eggs. The female can, so if you have multiple females in there, you're talking about thousands of eggs. Adults can live a relatively long period of time, 3 to 30 days. Lesser wax moths, not nearly as much. Wax moths are kind of a cleanup crew. They're not the ones that kill your colony, but they will definitely cause some damage to the colony. Now, real quick, so if you look there, these are both of the wax moth larvae. You can see those front feet and then the kind of the pseudo feet in the middle there. Now, this is a comparison between wax moths and small hive beetles. I'm sure you've seen this picture around. It's pretty popular on the internet. But a dead giveaway with this is you don't see those little proto feet in the back for a wax moth, or sorry, for a small hive beetle, where you do for the wax moth. You also have these little spiky protuberances on the ridge on the sides of the small hive beetle, and also the way that they move. The wax moth larva moves like a caterpillar, whereas the small hive beetle larva moves more like a worm, more like scurrying than slinking along. So that's one definite way to tell the difference between those two. The issue that we have with the wax moth is once the larvae get into the comb, it can cause a tremendous amount of damage. Generally invades weaker or dying colonies. Like I said, they're kind of a wait and see cleanup crew. I've definitely seen them, the adults, residing in a very healthy colony. They'll usually be at the entrance or along the edges of the bottom board. They're really just there hanging out, waiting until they can lay eggs. Once they do, those larvae will start feeding very voraciously. They will go through, and start eating through the wax, and they're looking for the bee bread. They're looking for any nutrition that they can find in it. Once they've eaten enough, they will actually go and form these cocoons. The cocoons can be very hard to remove. They're almost impossible for the bees to remove. So it's something that you'll have to do yourself if you have a colony webbed out by wax moths. A lot of times you will see, and not even in a colony where they've taken over, but sometimes you'll see these trails that lead away, and you're generally in a very straight line going through the cells. That's a good indication that you have a wax moth issue. And I'll show you that in a healthy colony here in just a second. But finally, one of the worst infestations you can get is when they completely web out the combs like this. These combs are unusable to the bees. I always recommend, you can save the woodware, but generally, unless you have a surplus of wax and really want to take the time to wipe off or clean out the plastic cell, it's best just to throw these away and replace them. If you can recycle them, that's even better, although I'm not 100% sure of the type of plastic they use, so good luck with that. Finally, I just wanted to show you this. This is something you'll see sometimes. Some people will call this bald brood. There is another issue that is referred to as bald brood. But if you're seeing uncapped larvae in these kind of linear fashions, these little straight lines, that's generally a good indication that you may have wax moth larvae going through there. Sometimes what will happen is that they'll uncap them. They'll figure out, okay, well, nothing's wrong with the larva. They'll recap them. That wax moth has had a channel going underneath there. The silk that they use in their movement can catch the baby bee up. And so when that bee goes to emerge, she's unable to emerge because she's basically trapped at the bottom of the cell. And so that can be an issue that you can run into occasionally with this. I've definitely taken frames on healthy colonies and tapped them when we're trying to dislodge larvae or look for mites, and had a wax moth larva pop its head out, which probably surprised me as much as the wax moth larva to be jerked around like that. So that can be a big issue with that. There are treatments available, but mostly for storage of comb, which is the biggest issue. Traditionally, we've used paramoth, which is not the same as wax moth balls. It's a different formulation. I'm not a huge fan of that just because it's a fumigant, so my warehouse tends to smell like that over the winter. There is a new treatment out from Vita Europe called Certain, which is a BT product, so similar to the BT that's applied to corn to get rid of corn earworms, that type of thing. It's a very safe to use biological treatment for the frames, will not harm the bees at all, but will destroy the wax moth larva before it has a chance to do any damage to your stored comb. So I do recommend looking into that. It is something that's sprayed on that lets the frame, you let the frame dry before you put it in storage. And then once it's applied, you don't have to worry about it for I think up to about a year. So really cool product. I'm very happy that it's finally on the market. So moving on to some other issues that you may find. Chalk brood, this is definitely one that I see in the spring and also see in areas that have high humidity for long periods of time. It is a fungal disease. I can tell you 100% with this one, requeening fixes it almost every time. And so you'll find these little mummies on the entrance board, on the bottom board. A lot of times you'll find them in the cells. If you take the frame, it actually rattles with these mummies. This is just a fungus that has covered the larva. The bees will do their best to remove them. However, in an extreme case, it's very hard for the bees to do that. This is one of those things that just weakens the colony, similar to European FoulBrood. If you have this really bad in the spring, that colony may never really take off and do well throughout the year because they were never able to get those populations up. And again, these little diseases like this, coupled with all the other pest and disease issues that the bees face, it's just, one little straw to break the camel's back. So anything we can do to help them with this is a very good thing. Another pest that I wanted to bring up, and this is something that we don't really see anymore, but used to be a big issue, is trachea mites. To me, they're more of a fascination because I cannot even imagine a mite that's adapted to live in the trachea, in those little white tubes that I showed you on the European FoulBrood larva. These mites live in those tubes. And so it's a tiny little insect that lives inside of an even, you know, a pretty small bee. So absolutely blows me away. We don't really see these anymore. The treatments, probably still available, I think, through the supply houses, but I wouldn't really worry about these. Something you probably won't ever encounter. Now, something you will encounter, but unfortunately the treatments aren't all that great, is nosema. We used to have Nosema apis was the dominant strain. If you've ever heard about fecal staining on the front of your colonies, that type of thing, that was a dead giveaway for Nosema apis. Unfortunately, Nosema apis has been overtaken by Nosema cerana. This doesn't give those characteristic fecal stainings on the front of the colony after winter. It's more of an ongoing infection in the bees, so it's a little bit harder to diagnose. We can diagnose it in the lab. It is a microsporidian, which is this really crazy little doodad that not quite living, not quite dead, kind of, you know, does its own thing. But once it infests the bees' guts, it can really take over and can really rob the bees of nutrition. And so it becomes a big issue. There are treatments. Fumagillin is back on the market now. It was taken off briefly due to the manufacturer discontinuing it. It is rather expensive. There is an argument, and I would tend to agree with it, that the treatment might be worse than the disease. And so if you think that you have nosema, which would be a characteristic of your hives just are not building up well, that you just cannot get very good production out of them, you can have it tested. The USDA can test it. Bee-Informed Partnership can test for it. It may be worth treating. Realistically, re-queening the colony might be your best bet, or your bet before you go through the trouble of treating. So just some things to think about with nosema. It's definitely out there. We definitely see it, but until we can get a little bit more options, I'm not sure treatment is necessarily the best thing for it right now. Another pest, and this is something we had in the United States, Dr. Dewey Karen out of University of Delaware was the last person that I've ever been able to find that positively identified bee louse, a Varroa, in the United States. You can see that middle picture there. That is galleries that they create through a honey super. And we still see those from time to time, so we're pretty sure they're still around. We're just not seeing adults. And so this bottom left picture here is a picture I took in South Africa, where they're still very much around. They generally will live on queens. They're a parasite, but in a lot different way than the Varroa mite. They actually will just take a ride on the bees, and when they're fed, they actually will scurry down and steal a little bit of that food that queen is being fed, and then go back and hang out until they're ready to be fed again. So they're not really that bad of a parasite as they go, which is pretty bad to think about. But you know, we don't really see those in the United States. But if you ever see something you think looks like that, it's always best to get a sample if you can, send it to your local extension or University of Michigan to get positively ID'd. There are other mites out there, like the Tropilelaps mite, that we're really hoping doesn't come into the United States, that could possibly be confused for Varroa. So if you have any question in your mind, let somebody know about it and let them positive identify it. But I don't really think you'll find this very much. Now, another one, and this is one that I actually had issues with this spring, pygmy shrews. They will go into a colony and treat it as a buffet during the cold weather. This on the bottom right is a picture from one of the colonies this year that I had here in Maryland. Out of a yard of 10 hives, I had 5 of them die, most likely because they were whittled down by the shrews. And so this is something that you can keep out of your colony by installing mouse guards, but it's something to keep an eye out for. It's another pest that until very recently I didn't even know about. So I just wanted to pass on that knowledge. Another thing are mice or other type of vermin taking up residency in the colonies. They will utilize the resources in there. Again, this is kind of a cool picture I took down in South Africa. This is a dormouse. So in addition to the house mice and different things that we find here, Other mammals do definitely find their way into beehives, so it's something to look out for. Putting mouse guards on can help a lot. Robbing screens set to the up position can help as well. So lots of different things you can do for this. If you have issues with mice and stuff in the past, they'll generally return. So go ahead and put those mice guards on, especially in the fall, and that should help you quite a bit. Other issues, skunks and bears. I actually had a couple colonies this year that I found these little skunk pellets in front of. What they'll do is they'll actually will sit at the front of the colony, tap on it, get those bees nice and mad. As soon as the bees come out, they'll start snacking. So if you've ever seen that meme on Facebook with the dogs, the spicy sky raisins, I think that's what they think they are. So it's a real good way for the skunks to get a little nutrition and not necessarily destroy your hive, but they can definitely weaken the forager force on that. Now, bears are a whole different thing. I've had many colonies over the years, especially down in Florida, get upturned and knocked over because of bears. They're looking primarily, you know, in contrast to what Winnie the Pooh has taught us, they're actually looking for the brood. They want that protein. I've seen them definitely toss away honey frames to go right for the brood frames. So unfortunately, if you do have a bear that starts to go into your apiaries, I always recommend calling the Fish and Game agency in your state to let them know that you have a bear issue, because sometimes if bears become habituated to areas, they can become a nuisance and actually a danger. If you're in an area that you suspect might have bears, electric fences work wonders. And so I've done that over the years and definitely had trail cameras on it, caught bears trying to get into the fence, and the shocks will discourage them. They won't always stop them, but they'll discourage them. So something to keep an eye out. Another one are wasps. Wasps and yellow jackets can create a huge issue in colonies, especially in the southern climates. A lot of times these colonies will persist year after year. They don't die over winter like they do in the northern latitudes. I've lost an apiary, about 30 colonies to wasp one year. It was very heartbreaking, very devastating. So something to think about. They're really in there looking for the protein, but don't negate the issues that they can cause. They can be really big issues. And finally, this one's going to wrap up my presentation tonight, but just some other pests that I found around colonies. These are more incidental pests. They don't take that many bees at a time. Praying mantises, I've seen them sit there right by an entrance and grab bees as they go by. Assassin or wheel bugs, these really alien H.R. Geiger looking bugs. They have a very long proboscis. They reach out and will grab the bee and then stick that proboscis in there and suck out their insides. They can become an issue. And then finally, robber flies. Those are another one that I've seen quite a bit around colonies that will go around and snatch up bees. They're only usually doing 1 or 2 bees. Another one I should have put on here is dragonflies. I've sat there actually this week and watched 2 dragonflies hunt the front of a beehive. It was pretty amazing to watch. Not too happy about it though, because I'm pretty sure that some of my virgin queens over the years have been snatched up by dragonflies. So just another pest, not much we can do about them, but you know, it's one of those things to look out for. So next I want to give you guys just a couple websites that I always like to end with. First one is Mite Check Program, which I know you guys are involved with up there. I highly encourage you guys, if you're able to, jump on the website, get on your iPhone, download the app, report your mite numbers. It really helps. If we can get as many beekeepers as possible doing this, we'll get some really great information and we'll be able to really discern seasonal trends with mites in specific areas. I think it's a really great citizen science project that we've had going on for a number of years. University of Maryland Bee Squad, like she mentioned before, undbsquad.com. You can find all of our social media stuff on there on the homepage on the right-hand side. We have links to all of that. We're pretty active on Facebook and Facebook and Instagram. We have a Twitter account, although I'm probably not going to continue that one for much longer. vanEngelsdorp Bee Lab, if you want to know what the lab and the students and everybody are up to and Dennis is up to these days, check out the lab. We're actually in the process of updating that website. The Bee Informed Partnership, a lot of that information I told you about the virus surveys, that type of thing, can be found on the Bee Informed Partnership's website. Honeybee Health Coalition, It's the Honeybee Health Coalition. If you haven't heard about it before, you really need to look it up. They provide a lot of really great free information on Varroa control, on best management practices, on BMPs for keeping bees in corn, keeping bees in soy. I think they're looking at cotton and a couple other commodity crops right now as well. And then finally, Bee Extension, Bee Health. This is a website maintained by multiple extension agents around the country to provide information on bee health. And there's a lot of really good information, including information on different viruses on that website. And so finally, I want to end it with this picture. This is what I hope that every one of you has the absolute joy of seeing every time you go out to your colonies. I know I don't. I know I am always looking to keep hives a little bit healthier, but these are some colonies that I had a few years ago that I absolutely loved. It was great queen stock, and every time I opened them up, they were like boiling over with bees. And so I really hope and wish that you guys have this in your bee colonies. If you don't, start thinking about why and start coming up with a game plan of how you can make this happen, because ultimately as beekeepers, this is what warms our heart and this is what we really want to see.